There's a classic story about IDEO. Many years ago, IDEO designed a kid's toothbrush for Oral-B, and an industry assumption at the time was that kids have small hands, so their toothbrushes should be smaller and thin. So in this case, the designers went and observed real kids brushing their teeth, and it turns out that kids have much less dexterity with their hands. They actually hold their toothbrushes completely differently with their whole fist. And the insight was that kids actually need fat, squishy toothbrushes. And that toothbrush became the number one kid's toothbrush. 20 years later, one of the IDEO designers on that project was on a beach on the other side of the world, and washed up on the beach in front of them was one of those Oral-B kids' toothbrushes. Whoops. And like so many plastics products, the design didn't account for the full life cycle of the product.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. When my father was in a hospital, I watched the orderly who wheeled him to radiology leave him in a hallway, diagonal to a wall and facing away from other people as if he were some kind of an object. This is not uncommon. From hospitals to TSA checkpoints, universities, or workplaces, many large systems have a tendency to lose focus on the experience of the people within them. Our guest today, Deirdre Cerminaro, has been working on this problem. She spent the last 15 years figuring out how to combine creative methods of human-centered design and the analytical tools of systems thinking and strategy as a lever to drive organizational change. As a former architectural designer and executive director at IDEO and a recent IDEO U instructor, Deirdre has led the conversation on human-centered systems thinking, a problem-solving approach that works with large systems to create positive experiences for the stakeholders within them. Deirdre holds a BA in Cognitive Science and an MBA from Yale University. Her notable projects at IDEO include redesigning systems from reimagining student services at a community college in Ohio to creating programs to deliver quality, affordable education at scale in Peru. In this episode, Deirdre and I talk about how she has designed her own experience of work, human-centered systems thinking, and real-world problems that combine systems and human-centric design. We also discuss Deirdre's experience creating and scaling a K-12 school system internationally, the relationship between mental models and systems, best practices in systems mapping, her zoom-in and zoom-out design tool, managing trade-offs between stakeholders, and other topics. So, don't forget to stay in the loop with Work for Humans by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Deirdre Cerminaro. Deirdre Cerminaro, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you so much, Dart. It's great to be here.
You seem like somebody who is crafting your work experience. The first time I talked to you in preparation for this, you had palm trees in the background. You were on a beach someplace in Mexico and working. So before we jump into what you do, how have you designed your own experience of work?
The answer to that relates to what I do, but it goes back to my work philosophy, which has always been to follow my intuition and to do the next right thing. In college, I followed an interest in psychology, philosophy, behavior to study cognitive science. I also made a deal with myself that if I didn't study abroad, I would move abroad after college. So I moved to Thailand and taught art. And while I was abroad, I kept thinking about these two architecture classes that I'd taken my senior year of college, which had really stuck with me because it was this intersection of art, math, history, people. So despite having very little experience, I pursued that and ended up working in architecture for a few years. And that's where I got really interested in design, innovation, leadership, management, social impact, which eventually led me to go to business school. And this very nonlinear career path led me to IDEO, which is a global design and innovation firm. It was finally a place where all these things I'd done separately came together. So design, business, social impact, and behavior. And I spent the last 10 years at IDEO helping clients to design innovative products, services, experiences, visions, strategies, and develop creative capabilities. And after a decade at IDEO, the next right thing for me was to slow down and take a break. So I left IDEO in the fall and took a 4-month sabbatical, the highlight of which was spending 2 months in Patagonia. And that is what led me to still currently, though you can't see it, be at the beach in Baja, where I'm designing the next chapter of my career.
That's wonderful. One of the people we had on the show was Bill Burnett, who wrote the book Designing Your Life. And he talks about curiosity and essentially agility and exploring different alternatives. And it sounds like that's very much the path you're taking.
Definitely.
So now you study something and you teach something at IDEO that is one of my abiding passions, which is understanding how large systems affect the experience of individuals within them. And for me, it's almost like an art form, which is if systems were a medium, how would you design them to create a different kind of experience or the right kind of experience? And I see a lot of examples where it's bad, going through TSA or in hospitals. There was one time when my father was in the hospital and he was being wheeled to radiology. And the person who wheeled him there parked him in a hallway, not facing other people in wheelchairs, kind of diagonal to the wall. And I was like, how did this system treat my father like a thing on a loading dock? You have designed the human-centered and teach the human-centered systems thinking course at IDEO. And that's what I want to talk about today, is how that works. So the words, there's human-centered and there's systems thinking. And I think we know what both of those mean. We're pretty good with human-centered, we're pretty good with systems thinking, but bringing them together into a single curriculum, why?
One thing to be clear, the course that I teach, it's with IDEO U, which is IDEO's creative school for leadership. And I'm the lead instructor for that course, but I don't work at IDEO anymore. Just want to make sure that's clear.
Right. Make that clear.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Human-centered systems thinking is really a problem-solving approach. Like you said, it combines two things, these analytical approaches of systems thinking and the creative tools of human-centered design. So it really blends and integrates these two approaches. The way I see it, systems thinking and systems thinkers are really good at zooming out and seeing the big picture, but it lends itself to this more academic point of view, to analysis, and that can also quickly get you to analysis paralysis, where the system is so big and complex. What do I even do next? And also thinking at that systems level can take you really far from the experiences of people in the system, which is what you just said. And what human-centered design is really great at is understanding people, really understanding people and taking those insights and turning them into something tangible so that you can try and test and do something. So if you're a designer, the approach can help you incorporate elements of systems thinking that I like to think of it as widening your aperture. You can see and take into account the bigger picture. And if you're a systems person, it can help you come down from that 10,000 foot level and really connect with people and incorporate what you see to understand people, humans, and the system. And so for some people, this is very intuitive. Many elements of what we'll talk about sound very similar to service design or organizational design or systems architecture. Some people already do this, but don't call it this. I talked to someone the other day who said learning about this gave them the language and tools and confidence to do something they were already doing intuitively. So it really is where these approaches meet each other and where by having an approach, you may do it intuitively, but you can do it more intentionally. And where these approaches can kind of bring out the best in each other.
I think that one of the biggest problems with work historically has been that when a company gets big enough and you start thinking of it as a system, you start treating people as actors, or essentially you get so much distance on the population that you stop seeing individuals and you start seeing resources. I can see it that this is very useful for two different populations. One population is a population whose job it is to think architecturally and to give them the tools to bring it down and think about what the experience is going to be for individuals. I can also see it for people who are in the business of solving challenges for individuals and giving them tools with which to look bigger than that and see what the bigger sources of that experience might be in the system. So IDEO's roots are, I think anyway, in product design. So, when I think of IDEO, I think of a product design house. And I think that's just old news. I think IDEO is a lot more than that now. It's been thinking a lot more than that for a long time. It's just that they're so famous for the mouse. But is product design a subset of this approach? Or are they two different approaches to different kinds of problems?
I love this question. I think you can, and in many cases should, bring a systems lens to many, if not most, problems. There's a classic story about IDEO. It's a bit of an apocryphal story, but it makes a point. And the story goes, and this part is true, that many years ago, IDEO designed a kid's toothbrush for Oral-B. And an industry assumption at the time was that kids have small hands, so their toothbrushes should be smaller and thin. IDEO's approach is called design thinking, or human-centered design, or user-centered design. Those all mean the same thing. And it starts with really understanding and empathizing with people. And one method for that is observation and ethnography and talking to people. So in this case, the designers went and observed real kids brushing their teeth. And it turns out that kids have much less dexterity with their hands. They actually hold their toothbrushes completely differently with their whole fist. And the insight was that kids actually need fat, squishy toothbrushes. And that toothbrush became the number one kid's toothbrush. That sounds like a simple human-centered product story, but the story continues that 20 years later, one of the IDEO designers on that project was on a beach on the other side of the world, and washed up on the beach in front of them was one of those Oral-B kids' toothbrushes. Whoops. And like so many plastics products, the design didn't account for the full life cycle of the product. So here's a 20-year-old toothbrush sitting on the beach in Indonesia. And IDEO talks about this story now in their climate work. It's a great example and reminder of the circular economy and how important that is in product design, but also more broadly that even simple things are part of larger systems. So as you said, IDEO's roots are in product design, and over the last few decades, certainly IDEO's work, but also design in general, has started to tackle more and more complex challenges, from products to services to experiences to businesses and organizations, cultures, big social challenges. So to go back to your question, I don't think of product design as a subset of systems design, but it's as an additive and expansive approach, something that can be integrated in. And the more complex the challenge, the more necessary it becomes. Because as we've seen, even with something seemingly simple like a toothbrush, there's a systems design challenge behind that.
Right. And that's a third challenge. So I named two. You're a systems person. You need to make sure that you don't forget people. You're doing design, and you have to think about all the things that create the full experience of the thing being designed for the individual. That's a systems challenge. But then there's this other thing, which is really taking into consideration all the other stakeholders who are both critical to the success of the experience, but also maybe affected by this product years from now. So I see that there's a lot of different ways to look at it. By the way, it reminds me of a conversation that I had on the show with Don Norman, where we were talking about the circular economy. He had written a book called Design for Humanity. We talked a lot about the designer's role in creating a circular economy. And actually, his argument was that designers needed to pick up a pretty big new toolbox to do it, that they were not in the habit of using the tool set that you're describing.
Undo, but I think historically, yeah. And it's called user-centered design in many cases, but it's not only the users that you're designing for. Again, the more complex the challenge, the more true that is.
So let's talk about an example of a problem that you've worked on that used the combination of systems and human-centric design. I know you worked on a school, so you have a lot of experience designing for education, and you worked at some schools in Peru. Let's talk about this school in Peru, and let's tell the whole story. How did you pick it up? How did it start happening?
This is a big story, and actually, I've worked on with this client for many years, but the origins predate even my time at IDEO. And it's a story of work that IDEO did with Intercorp, which is a Peruvian conglomerate, to design a school system called Innova Schools. And it's the example I turn to most often to explain what human-centered systems thinking is. starting about 15 years ago, Peru's public school system was in the bottom of the educational rankings internationally. And Intercorp is, as I mentioned, a conglomerate. They have a lot of pharmacies, banks, malls, serving the middle class and the rising middle class. And they set out with this huge ambition to design a private school system that was three things: affordable, scalable, and excellent. And they did a few things that are great examples of systems approaches to this. They set out first, exactly as you just mentioned, to understand all the stakeholders, both obvious and non-obvious. So yes, they talked to students, parents, teachers, principals, education experts, ed tech companies, real estate developers, school systems in other countries. They went really broad with understanding the landscape of stakeholders and how this fit into the whole system in Peru. Designing a new education system is very complex. And then they zeroed in on a few huge constraints or root problems that they were really going to have to design around to be successful. There's so much to design, but they use these as a springboard for innovation. So like, if we don't figure that out, this will not be successful. And one of the biggest ones of those root problems was teachers. So in any school system, teacher salaries are one of the biggest drivers of cost. They really wanted to keep the school system affordable. But maybe a bigger challenge was going to be that in a country with a struggling education system, qualified teachers were going to be hard to find. And that was only going to be increasingly true at scale, which was always the goal from the very beginning. The third thing they did was to then design a system with interlocking pieces that work together and reinforce each other as a whole. So that's a really key component of systems design, is you only make decisions that make the whole system better, not a part of it. So architects don't optimize for the functionality of one room, but the whole house. You're not going to make a decision that makes this room great, but now we don't have room for a bathroom in our house. You don't do that. So same thing here. Some of the innovations that they came up with for Inova Schools was a digital teacher resource center to allow teachers to share lesson plans and really learn and build from one another. They developed a blended learning pedagogy that incorporated technology to actually teach students skills that, like math, that teachers may not themselves have expertise in. Or they also designed classrooms to be more flexible for both this personalized learning, like kids on a laptop working at their own pace, as well as group collaborative work, which is one of the other pillars of the school. They then designed a campus that was modular, that took these classrooms and made it modular so it could be adapted to different school sites. They knew they were going to scale. They're always going to have these different school plots. They didn't want to have to start over every time. So they developed a modular system to building these schools. And then they developed a business model that underpins all of this to keep the school at an affordable price for the rising middle class families. And the goal was always to have impact at scale, not just in Peru, but to build a school system that could have a positive impact in the region. And since then, it's actually hard to keep up with the numbers because they keep changing and opening schools, but they have over 70 schools in Peru, over 50,000 students, and actually have opened 10 schools in 3 other countries in Latin America. So there's been so many innovations since then, including the teachers at different points in scale, and they anticipated this happening. They knew they'd have to find new solutions. So at one point, they designed a whole new teacher training program. At one point, they actually designed a teacher training institute. So they've continued to iterate and evolve the model, but it's been extremely successful and is a great example of both understanding the landscape and then designing a system that actually functions as a system.
I'll tell you what kind of a problem that sounds like. This is a labored analogy. Brace ourselves. It reminds me of protein folding. Here's why. Why it's very, very hard to predict how proteins are going to fold is because every part of the protein is solving for its local gradient. And the whole protein has to ultimately fold into a shape. But when you're modeling it, you have to think about how every single charged part of that thing is going to respond. And they're all responding dynamically to each other as they fold. Okay, why do I think it's like that? I think it's like that because what you're trying to create is you're trying to create a dynamic but stable equilibrium. And the way proteins solve this is they fold a little bit and they see what's going on, and they fold a little bit and they see what's going on. And I wonder if this was not a think design, we're done thing. I would imagine that it had to get a rough draft, start to build, discover how things worked, build some more like it. It must have been iterative.
Oh, absolutely. This team that had built Innova is amazing and some of the most inspiring leaders you'll ever meet. But one funny story about that is at the beginning of this, there was first of all, there were a few schools that they started with. And so they were able to try and test things as they were going and building. Definitely, there was a lot of testing, iterating, prototyping of the model. And then there was a big book that was printed that had like, here's the school model, like this is it. And there was one page in it that said, there's 8,000 details in here, but like, here are the three things. Like, you got to get these right. And that was really important for systems design because it's so easy to get, like, got to do so many things when you start a system. There were a couple things that were like, got to keep figuring these ones out. And also, that book, a year later, joked there was a physical book that was covered in Post-its and that all those ideas in there had grandchildren. Like, they hadn't evolved past one phase of it. They'd actually evolved past multiple phases of it. And I worked with them when they were expanding the school system for the first time internationally to Mexico. And at that point, we did where is the school system today as a whole? Because it had evolved, but it's exactly that. It's evolving intentionally. There's experiments, but you're also making sure you bring the whole system along. So how can we expand to Mexico? How can Mexico help us learn in Peru? How can Peru help Mexico learn? And it's always been this system that's never satisfied because they knew the blended learning approach was very innovative at the time, became much more common. They knew that it wouldn't be enough to innovate once. There's been so many iterations over time, and that mindset and approach has been built into the DNA of the schools, including for the students. There's an innovation program that the students take to also learn these skills because they are also part of the pedagogy was teaching students to be creative and resilient and innovative and problem solvers.
We had Leslie Ann Noel on the show who wrote the book Designing for Social Change. And she talked a lot about how the people who are inside the system need to be participatory in the design of the system. I'd love to get all the students working on it. There might be an interesting nugget in there, which is that a part of the design of this school was attracting the teachers. A part of attracting the teachers is pay, which we've mentioned. But were there any, do you recall, considerations about what teachers really wanted from this work that were a part of the design?
I'm 100% sure that there were. I'm not sure that I could tell you what they were in the beginning. A lot of learning in Peru and in many countries is very rote learning still. The teacher stands and delivers content. Students take notes, write it down, and parents can see at the end of the day what their kids did because they come home with a notebook full of stuff. A challenge with this model was also really being able to explain to parents that you can't see that notebook, but they did learn today. Part of the value proposition was allowing teachers to teach in a new way, but they knew that wouldn't last either because they're also hoping that other people will see what they're doing, see that it's leading to better educational outcomes, and actually start to shift other school methods too. So that wasn't enough. And again, at scale becomes increasingly challenging. So yes, definitely the needs of teachers were taken into account. What are teachers looking for? Their school systems run on teachers. Teachers are so important and valuable and underpaid. And so, yes, definitely that was core to how they thought about it.
I can see that, though. Autonomy to teach. It's a constant struggle in California, which is that there's always this fight between what the state wants to mandate for teachers and teachers' accurate belief that they are professionals who should be allowed the autonomy to teach flexibly. You're absolutely right about, I don't know about Peru, but I know about Mexico. Mexico, at least this used to be true, every student in the country is on the same page at the same day of the workbooks. It's highly, highly structured.
Yes, exactly. And it's not very effective for learning, actually.
Right. So let's actually talk about the structure first, and then we'll talk about the tools, and then we'll talk about how we might be able to apply them to work. One of the things about the design process is that it's become highly structured. And there's pros and cons to that, I think. And IDEO, of all companies, has done more to popularize how to do design than any other company. But the tools are not always picked up with nuance, and they're not always picked up with true empathy. And I know, for instance, I've applied them in companies where the people who hired me to apply those tools really just wanted something that supported their conclusion that they already had. But the other thing is that when I look at the big steps that are in the methodology that are part of the curriculum at IDEO U, there are slightly different steps. I mean, they are different steps. It's visualize the system, humanize the system, and then redesign. And so can you talk about those big steps and what each of them means?
First, to oversimplify, if you take a classic design thinking approach, there's many methods you use to empathize with users, to synthesize your learnings, to brainstorm solutions, to test, experiment, and learn and iterate towards solutions. And as you said, it's always described in this linear way, as if it's a linear process, and it isn't. It never actually is. And I think that's one of the challenges of extending and democratizing these tools, is that they seem like I do this and then this and then this and then I get to the outcome. It's not like that. Even just in design, it's not like that. There's always learning and research and experimenting along the way. You might make a prototype on the first day of your project because you have an idea and you want to take it into research. Like, that's actually how it works. It's much messier than that. But you're, broadly speaking, moving in that direction.
That's great. I love that advice, which we don't always hear in how we receive the tools.
Absolutely. No, there's a nuance that is lost and extremely important. And something that I've heard from clients over and over, actually, that one of the things they learn most from working with IDEO or with designers is how messy it is, and actually observing how designers move through the mess. So if you were to incorporate systems thinking or systems design, I also sometimes use those terms interchangeably, lens into this approach, you might do a few things differently. And again, not linearly. In the course that at IDEO U, it is step 1, step 2, step 3. It's not really like that. You don't have to do every step in that order. But the point is to give you tools and language and confidence to try them at all. But if you were to incorporate in, we can go back to that first toothbrush example. Like, first, you might design the problem differently, redefine the problem differently. So from designing a toothbrush for kids to designing a toothbrush for kids and the planet, we're already in a totally different project. For Innova, that was designing at scale. That really influenced the process from start to finish. That was, and how they were going to, that would work, but not at scale. So let's try something else. And then, yes, there's a super important part of visualizing the system. You can use lots of tools for that. You can come back to systems mapping as a tool, but visualizing the system, really understanding how you map all the stakeholders. So now you might think of, yes, kids and parents, also dentists, retailers, manufacturers. You might understand, what is the whole stakeholder system around even something as simple as a toothbrush. And now you might go into your interview process actually with different questions. You're still going to talk to kids and parents. You're still going to watch them brush their teeth. But you might ask also, how do you choose a toothbrush? What do you do with it? How long do you keep it? Where do you throw it away? Like, get curious about other things. And you also might talk to new people, like sustainable brands or manufacturers. And then when you synthesize your learnings, you might look for, like, what are the root causes of what's going on here? So again, in the Innova example, it was like teachers and design teachers was going to be one big root challenge. In this case, a huge theme you're going to hear is ocean plastics and the constraints of materials and manufacturing and costs. And then you can look for leverage points. So a lot of this concept draws from the work of Donella Meadows on finding leverage points in systems. We look for the highest impact places where a solution could shift a system. In this case of a toothbrush, it's probably going to be the material, but it could be something like educating families about how long you can use a toothbrush, or I'm making that up, but something, different leverage points in the system that you might press. And then you might emerge with a different solution. So a toothbrush head that incorporates bamboo, and maybe your material innovation has an impact on the industry or on competitors or the life cycle of the toothbrush. So you can see you're in the same project, same general flow even, but at each step of the way, you can incorporate a different tool to help you, like, zoom out, see the bigger picture, and then use what you learned there to zoom back in, ask different questions, test something differently.
when you're talking to stakeholders and you're doing this work, I mean, it's certainly true with users, which is you take them as they are. So much of the design methods are about deeply empathizing with people so that you can design things that meet their needs. But in this larger context, are changing the minds, changing the stakeholders ever become a part of the solution? Because in product design, it's very rarely about changing the people. I'm going to understand you. I'm going to make it for you, and we're done.
Yes. So answer to that is definitely. I think even in product design, again, if you come back to circular economy, you might be changing attitudes towards disposable plastic. There's still mindsets baked in there. But definitely sometimes, often even what's at the root of a problem can be a mindset. There's a big overlap between organizational design and systems design. A lot of the methods are similar, and organizations are systems made up of people. So I've done, and IDEO also does a lot of work in culture change, especially in building more innovative and creative cultures. And culture is essentially made up of behaviors and mindsets. It's what people are doing and what mental models they're carrying around. And you can't actually design any of those directly. You can't design a mindset. You can't design a behavior, but you can design the things that give rise to them. So you can design strategy, structure, processes, roles, incentives, infrastructure. Those are all designable, and they're often called levers for change also. That's also something I often teach, is looking for using these levers of change. What if we introduced a new process or a new role? And there are many examples of organizations that wanted to build more creative cultures. So for example, an auto company that wanted to be more innovative, but there was a mindset of risk aversion in the auto industry, fear of failure. So managers introduced a new metric of how many prototypes have you launched? That's a incentive, but it really is trying to reinforce a new mindset of actually trying and maybe failing, but trying things, obviously safely in that case. But yes, definitely when you're trying to do these bigger organizational culture work, a lot of it is trying to understand, like, what are these underlying mental models that are in the way? And then how do we design the things that influence them?
That's a way I've never actually thought about it before, which is the idea that mental models come from the system as opposed to mental models creating the system. It's a feedback loop.
Yes.
I'm sure. I'm sure it's a feedback loop. But just this idea that the mental models are coming from the system.
And obviously, people bring mental models in from their life and lived experiences, but the environment you're in definitely can encourage or discourage or manifest. Like, you might feel differently at a different company, and it's not you, actually. It's the incentive system and the structure and the processes around you.
Yeah, I've seen that going into companies. An example is in one company, the cool kids are salespeople, and in the other one, the cool kids are the coders. And that's a very different value system. And I think we're highly adaptive, maybe too adaptive to the value systems that we find ourselves in, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense. So I want to talk about the tools. There's two big ones that I see in your work. One is zooming in and zooming out. And we've talked a lot about that already, which is zoom out to see more stakeholders, zoom back in to solve, right? Which is that something that you've written and spoke about is that if you stay zoomed out too long, you don't know what to do, right? And you have to zoom in and actually start making specific changes. And it also sounds like, I was going to ask this question, but I think you've answered it, which is you also zoom out to see longer time horizons.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. It's definitely the case in circular design or scale, or actually, we're not just designing this product or this school for tomorrow, we're designing for a much longer time horizon. That definitely happens. And it happens in both ways. When you stay zoomed out, you can get stuck. And when you stay zoomed in, you can get stuck too. Like, wait, what problem are we trying to solve? What is this for? And it's a way of getting unstuck. I like to think of ways to get unstuck. You can go like, oh, I'm really overwhelmed by this problem. Okay, I'm going to go do another interview. I'm going to just write down what to make something that's in my head and show it to someone else. Like, get out of that feeling. And similarly, you can be staring at something like, I forgot what problem I'm trying to solve, or I'm stuck on this. What if I zoom out and talk to someone I haven't talked to, like take a step back. And zooming in and zooming out is, I think it's the most critical mindset. This is, again, something that's totally intuitive for some people and can't help but do it. Some people are more comfortable zoomed out or zoomed in to overgeneralize. And so it's an important mindset. I think when you become like really fluent at systems, you're doing it constantly, all the time. Oh, that connects to this. And oh, I see this big pattern and theme. Oh, what if we tried that? That's just constantly happening in your brain. But it's also something, like I said, you can do intentionally. You can also use it as a tool in these moments where you're stuck to either zoom out or zoom in and get unstuck.
I can just say from experience, it can be exhausting. You're like, strategy tactics all day long.
Absolutely.
Now, systems mapping. Let's talk about the pros and cons. Because the way I think in general of things like systems maps is that the visual part of your brain is just ginormous and can handle way more information than other parts of your brain. And so just getting it out there on the page in some form gives us access to it. But what are some of the best practices of systems mapping?
What you just said really resonates with me. I like to say that there's no wrong way to make a systems map. For me, systems mapping is fundamentally just about visualizing a system. The first reason for that is just to make our mental models visible to each other. Even at that basic level, it allows you to understand a problem in new ways. Like right now, we're talking about work. You and I might actually have different mental models of work. If I asked you to draw a picture of it and I drew a picture of it, we would learn something from doing that. And it's not about being good at drawing. It is about just trying to communicate what's in your head, especially when you're talking about complex topics. This is somewhere people are often using the same words, actually are thinking about different things, and so much gets lost. Like, what do you mean by strategy? What do you mean by that word? Tom Wooyek has a really great TED talk on this about solving wicked problems. And he goes through how you can really use simple visualization to help make unproductive conversations productive. So I'm a huge fan of systems mapping in this sense of, how do you see that? Can you just draw that? And getting these mental models out of our heads. There are also types of systems maps you can make. You can make one we've referenced a bunch today is like network maps or stakeholder maps, where you can both see who are all the stakeholders in this system, but then also like, what is the value exchange between them? So you can say, okay, where is knowledge moving in this system? Where does trust exist? Where is there some kind of emotional connections? Where are actual goods and services changing hands? It is always revealing to track where money moves within a system. There's also process maps. So this is very common in service design or user journeys, like trying to a little more linearly, what like onboarding for an organization, what is actually happening from start to end. That's another version of a systems map. And similarly, two people might have very different understandings of how that works. So here's how I think our onboarding process works. Ask someone in a different department, get a different answer. There's something interesting there. There's also, you might call them problem maps or iceberg models or cause analysis, which is really about understanding like what are the observable things and then what's going on underneath. And then there's just anything else you create that helps you visualize a system. I will say sometimes systems maps are useful artifacts on their own. Making one and having it tells you something. You're like, I'm so glad we have this now. I can refer to it. But the map is not the point. I think that's the biggest mistake I see people making in systems mapping. It's not to have a more and more complex map. It is about the conversation it enables you to have, the gap it allows you to spot, the thing it helps you get curious about and experiment around. It's not about the map. It's about what the map helps you do.
It really takes a lot of pressure off of the map when you say that. Because am I making an artwork? No. I'm making a gesture, right? It's like charades. It's about the communication. So people who've listened to the show for a long time will remember way back to one of the earliest conversations. I was part of a team that studied management around the world. And so it was Cisco Systems and Sapient. And so we were doing experience modeling. And the way we did it is we went around the world really diving deep with managers and following them around, interviewing them, filming them, talking to their teams, just getting immersed. And we did this for months. But every few weeks we would get together And we had an artist who followed us around, a visual artist and filmmakers. And what we would do is we would just all start talking about what is the ground up shapes that we're seeing. We tried to go in with no idea of anything, tried to just go in with no concept. And then just what are the ground up ideas that we're seeing? And we'd draw these drawings and the artist would do it. And then we'd say, that one right there, really not very good. And we were just, but we did iterations of it because we had to, it was a team of 6, but we had to come to some common understanding every few weeks of what was going on in our heads. And then at the end, they came out as something quite coherent. And I'll tell you the question that was one of the most powerful questions that we asked managers. It happened by accident. It was a very vague question. So how does it all fit together? And we thought, no way they can answer that question. No way they can answer it. And then they'd sit forward and they'd say, well, it fits together like this. And they'd start to draw it. And they would draw the networked world around them in different ways. Different people saw it differently. But just this weirdly weird, vague question. So, like you could ask it somebody on the street. So how does it all fit together?
That's a great question. I love collecting good questions that will elicit surprising answers from people.
Yeah. So I can see that. And I can see that there's a creative, I think this is important, actually, that it's not a template. Here's a template. This is what a systems map looks like. It's responsive to the need that you're trying to solve. And you can start off with some ideas, but it's a discovery of even what the dimensions of the map should be.
Exactly. It is very useful to look at examples because staring at a blank piece of paper is hard. But sometimes it just comes out, I think this connects to this and this. There you got a systems map. And you show it to someone, they're that makes me think of something differently. That was a useful systems map. There are times where you're trying to show something visually that you are trying to say, this is how these things connect. Like, this is the information architecture of our backend system. And that it does matter that you get it right. But in most cases, you're not trying to make the systems map right. And there's no right answer and there's no right way to make it. And there's no template to figure out. You can use tools as a starting point and as inspiration, but really, it should be informed by what you're researching, what experience you're having, who you're talking to. It's also a really good research tool to ask people to draw things, to draw systems maps themselves.
Yes, that's exactly what we did with that question, actually. And we gave them a giant piece of paper, and when we asked them a question, we gave them a pen, and they would draw it.
This, by the way, is exactly what Tom Wouyek's talk is about. He likes to ask people to draw, how do you make toast? And it's very fascinating he has thousands of these drawings, but people think about it in totally different ways. Some people think about, how did the butter get here? Some people think about the bread. Some people think about the actual toaster. It's very revealing of a lot of mental models that people are carrying around.
There was a throwaway question that I asked. I was even embarrassed to ask it when we were doing this research, which was I asked people, if our organization was an animal, what kind of animal would it be? And that's from a children's game, horse, muffin, something. And somebody would say it's a monkey. And then you'd say, why? And what I discovered was that they actually saw the organization as made of different materials, depending upon who they were. Like they saw the organization as being made out of a different thing than each other. It's wild.
I used to ask that question in job interviews, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like, if your work personality was an animal, what would it be? And then the real thing is why, and what does that tell me about you?
Is why.
And also, can you handle me asking you a weird question? Because this is the weird company.
Right. I was not in a weird company at the time, and it was a weird question. Have you ever seen human-centered systems design, other than Peruvian teachers, applied to the experience of work?
Definitely. As I said, there's a lot of overlap and intersection with organizational design, since organizations are systems. One example I go to often is actually, I've mentioned it before, but designing onboarding. So that's one of the most important moments in the employee life cycle. I worked both with a big tech company on their onboarding process and also actually on IDEO's own onboarding. Onboarding is way more complex than it seems. You're like, oh, HR does that, but it's not really owned by one team. It touches nearly every part of an organization, from HR to tech to the manager to the new team to facilities to peers. It actually involves everyone because the person's experience is of their first day, not of HR. And so we used a lot of the same tools.
Preaching to the choir on that one. When I see onboarding projects, if I saw them coming down the street, I would cross to the other side of the street. That's because everybody's involved. It's very, very hard to coordinate all of the actors. You have to get their identity. You have to get them a computer. You have to get them a phone. You have to teach them about the culture. You have to find a seat for them. So facilities is involved. It just goes on and on and on. And all of these different organizations, you have to get their bank account numbers so that you can direct. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, all the things that you have to do. And it's very hard to pull it off elegantly.
It is. It gave me a lot of empathy trying to also do it for IDEO. It's extremely complicated. And we didn't design the perfect onboarding process, but we improved from where we were. And we did a similar thing, mapping out like, who are all the people involved in this process? This is a little bit of a blend between the two projects, but also same as you would in service design. Who is doing what, when, and also asking different people to draw, what do you think is happening? Because there's a lot happening no one could see. It was happening somehow, but no one was actually managing it. Or in some cases, no one told the location that this person was going to show up. That happened after a big reorg where we realized like, oh, we need different systems. In one onboarding project, we also realized that from talking to so many people about their onboarding experience and what they as a person experience, this is the other side of the coin. So you can look at it through the, okay, what's the internal, who does what, who's doing what? But then we did do a lot of user empathy interviews. Like, what did it feel like? When did your onboarding start? When did it end? Those are really interesting questions. And what we actually realized that we were trying to draw a journey map, and we realized we couldn't draw one because it actually was not linear. People were actually moving through a set of feelings, not of steps in a process. And they kept moving through it in their first weeks and months. Feelings of uncertainty, feelings of excitement. It's like this little loop. And in both cases, we created and built prototypes, tested them with new employees, iterated, tried to find things out. And so it was both about really trying to understand the people and also the people on multiple sides. There's really hardworking HR people and talent people who are like, oh, I'm tearing my hair out about onboarding. Like, okay, tell me about that. What's so hard? Where are the frustrations? Where are there points in the process where there's friction? That's usually, we talk about, leverage points. There's lots of ways to find them. One place is to look for themes, patterns, and other places to look for friction or huge gaps. Like, wait, you don't know each other? Okay, that tells me something already about the way that this system works. So there's, yes, lots of ways because organizations are just collections of people, and people introduce complexity because people are irrational, unpredictable, and changing. There's lots of ways to bring this kind of thinking into thinking about organizations and the employee experience.
I've had that experience you just described a lot, where you're facilitating a design session and you assume you're the outsider. Everybody else that works for the company, you assume that they all know each other. And it turns out they've never met in their lives. They've never spoken. And they're all part of creating the same experience. Well, an experience. It's one experience for the person who gets it.
I'm going to forget exactly how this is phrased. There's a famous quote about that. That's basically like everything is like perfectly designed for the way that it is. So it might not have been designed intentionally, but it is leading perfectly to that outcome. And so that also means there's an opportunity to redesign it.
I'll think about that the next time I interact with one of these large systems. This is perfectly designed.
It is for something. It is.
For what's happening
right now. It's perfectly designed for that.
It seems like this is a method that is perfectly designed for B corporations. And so public benefit corporations are designed from the charter on up to think about multiple stakeholders. So public benefit corporations think about shareholders, they think about employees, they think about the environment, and they have a responsibility to all three. And so I'd argue that serving each benefits the others, but sometimes there's trade-offs, I would imagine. And so I guess it's a general question about this, which is you're looking for the mutual optimum, but how do you manage trade-offs How do you think about that between the stakeholders?
I wish I had a magic bullet answer to this one.
I keep asking questions until we find one that nobody can answer. That's the rule.
Yeah, that one is hard. There's always going to be constraints and trade-offs. One example I was thinking of coming into this conversation was of examples of designs that have like shifted systems is actually in the pandemic, people creating outdoor cafes, outdoor seating. Of course, that solved a problem of how are restaurants going to stay open? How are people going to eat? But it also shifted the feeling of city streets, the urban landscape. But it wasn't all positive. It also made parking really hard and traffic. And there's been a lot of debate about them and going away and coming back in a lot of cities since then. There are always going to be trade-offs and constraints. I think, like you said, in an ideal world, you're expanding the pie. There's more, you're creating more value, but there's going to be places where some people's pieces of the pie get smaller in comparison. The way I think about it is being clear and making intentional choices with reasoning, acknowledging that there's no right answer. So in a lot of equity-centered work, you have to hold a few things in tension. In design, there's a bias to action, to move quickly, to test, let's go. But with a lot of work around equity, you actually need to move much slower and move at that slow down to the speed of trust. And you really have to hold that intention and not solve it. Because if you slow down too much, you'll never have progress. And if you move too fast, you'll create harm. And I think that's true in a lot of work around equity and inclusion is you actually just have to learn to hold things in tension and not try to solve for the optimum. You can always seek to mitigate harm. And I think in many cases, I think giving power back to people who've been marginalized or underrepresented, there are some choices in the system that have more moral weight than others. But that's how I think high level about that question.
I want to make sure I'm clear on a word you're using. You're saying hold things in tension.
Yes.
Hold things in tension as opposed to intention.
Yes. In tension.
Hold things in tension. I have a lot to think about in regards to that concept because it seems to me it's a systems map, which is that there could be tensions. Like it's another thing. Like we talked about people are connected by information or by value exchange, by material exchange. But this idea that there's a tension map too, which is people moving potentially toward different objectives or with different stakes in the game. It's an interesting phrase.
Yeah, there's lots of examples of it. I also find it a very fascinating concept. Another one from like some equity work we've done is acknowledging I have a responsibility to like further equity work, and this is the work of generations, of lifetimes. Like I'm not going to solve it. I am not going to solve it. We aren't going to solve it either. And you guys got to hold those in tension. There's no thing to solve there, but saying it and stating it is helpful. And you can kind of feel when you're like, oh, I'm moving too fast. Need to move a little slower. Or, oh, I've taken on the weight of the world. And that's actually not helping either. And I used to think about this with company values also. A lot of companies have values. I think I'd love to see a company that holds values in tension with each other and holds them without trying to solve them. Like IDEO has a really powerful, for example, set of values. One of them is be optimistic. And optimism is talked a lot about in design. You got to have optimism. And it's true. There are times where it really is helpful to be like, well, what if we could solve it? Let's just put that hat on. You have to believe that some better outcome is possible, but also being optimistic has this huge shadow side that you have to always be happy or can't critique things and can't actually show up as your full self. There's lots of problems with optimism. And I think part of that would be mitigated if it just had a counterpart so that you aren't like, I got to always be optimistic. You don't.
I've actually seen that turn into some fairly damaging gaslighting, organizational gaslighting. Everything's great. And everybody's just like holding on by their nails.
Exactly. And I think there's something powerful about saying this isn't to be solved, but we want to acknowledge there's a tension around it. It's similar in this stakeholder trade-offs. You're going to make trade-offs. You have to make trade-offs. You can be clear, like, hey, we're choosing this. It's going to affect this. And here's why. Here's our rationale. And we'll come back to it and see what happens. But we're going to make a decision. And we've done the work to say, are we going to do more harm than less? There are things you can do to mitigate that. Or you can say, we're going to hold intention that this is going to be a trade-off between these two things. Let's just make that clear.
So as you know, I ask design questions about work. I've asked many people this question. What do you hire your job, Deirdre, to do for you?
I'm so glad to be asked this question now because I'm in this liminal state of my career. So I think I hire my job to do a couple things for me. One is to be an outlet and also a fuel for my creativity. So the feeling of unlocking a puzzle, of using my spidey senses, of taking what is a hazy thought and turning it into something you can touch. That's something that I hire my job for. I also hire it to make friends and communities of people who inspire me and like keep chasing that feeling of energetic collaboration. Like there's a feeling and an energy to that is so motivating and satisfying. I also hire my job to provide me with constraints. So it reminds me of a story of one of my mentors where she once moved to Paris for 6 months just to make art. And she didn't actually make very much art. And it helped her discover that she really loved design, like not art for art's sake, but creating things with constraints and with other people. And so I also hire my job to bring me other people's problems or to bring me problems and challenges that provide a set of constraints within which to be creative. Design loves constraints, and I love them too. I also hire my job to have an influence that is bigger than me. So to do things that I can't do alone and to impact more people in the world than I can on my own. And also to provide me with money and stability and enable my lifestyle outside of work. So while my sabbatical has been very restful and life-giving in many ways, it didn't provide me with any of these things. And that has been very revealing of what I hire my job to do.
I love the way you say those. Many of them I have names for. But sometimes what you hear when somebody responds to that question is that you have a name for something that has more ways of being than you thought. So one of them is to discover the unknown. But interestingly, a lot more people than I expected have answered the question to discover the unknown. But for you, when you talk about it, I like the sense of spidey sense, which is the idea of using potentially your aesthetic mind or your intuitive mind to know where to look in the unknown, to know which direction to go into the unknown.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a lot of systems designers, systems thinkers are really good synthesizers. And it's one of my superpowers. I can like hold a lot of complexity and be like, oh, here are the three things that matter. And I love that feeling. It's like very invigorating. Like, oh, yes. And I do think it comes from a lot of practice and intuition. And sometimes it comes from pulling on the right tool. And like, I think what we need to do now is this. And I think design can be both very rigorous and very intuitive. And it's that balance between them. Again, holding two things in tension, not solving them. And that almost like chasing that feeling of, oh yeah, there it is. Ah, that's it. I got it. We got it. It's a great feeling and energy.
There's a word that I don't think means what I think it means, which is eutheria, the joy of figuring things out. I don't think that's what that word means. But I read it once and I thought that's what it meant. And ever since it's been in my vocabulary.
I like that word.
What does your job cost you?
It costs me flexibility when I have a job. It costs me flexibility and outsources a lot of decisions that I would otherwise make differently. It also costs me a lot of emotional angst and anxiety. I'm definitely one of those people who puts too much of themselves into work. And I tend to love what I do, and that has a good side and a downside. And it also just costs me time and attention. Time not spent doing other things, hanging out with my dog or going on a 3-week backpacking trip, things I did on my sabbatical. It costs me that.
On the bright side, that's a local effect in the sense that if you can take a sabbatical every 5 years, if you draw a circle around the 5 years, you can get all of those things, just not simultaneously.
Yes, it's a designable thing to design around. And having this time has really helped me crystallize what I got from it and what I didn't. And it's great to not work and take a real break and have the privilege to do that. And also, it's been great to start working again and to feel that. I haven't felt that feeling in a while. Like, there it is. That's what my job is for.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, look, first of all, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time, taking you away from the beach right now. You could be sitting in the sand. Where can people learn more about you, learn more about your work, find the course that you teach, and other things?
People can find me on LinkedIn. That's where some of my articles and upcoming workshops and speaking engagements are to connect. And also the course is on IDEOU, which is IDEO School for Creative Leadership. It's a course on human-centered systems thinking, a lot of the topics we've been talking about today, and features me as an instructor. It's usually offered every couple times a year. And those are the best places to find me. And I am exiting and transitioning back into work mode. So it's a good time to connect and reach out.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.